Must say, you name Tobe. Kunta Kinte.
Let me add a brief description of how a male slave saw himself. To be a man and not to be a man, a father without authority, a husband and no protector, is the darkest of fates. Such was the condition of my father, and such is the condition of every slave throughout the United States. He owns nothing. He can claim nothing. His wife is not his. His children are not his. They can be taken from him and sold any minute as far away from each other as the human fleshmonger may see fit to carry them. Slaves are recognized as property by the law and can own nothing except by the consent of their masters. A slave's wife or daughter may be insulted before his eyes with impunity. He himself may be called on to torture them and dare not refuse. To raise his hand in their defense is death by the law. He must bear all things and resist nothing. If he leaves his master's premises at any time without a written permit, he is liable to be flogged. John Jacobs. Hey. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I don't know what time it is in your neck of the woods, but I want you to have a great day and be safe. Two individuals commented on the first part of the Florida's slave narrative video today, and they drew my attention to their comments. The first individual was an older woman, and she came swinging for the head with a sledgehammer. Now, that's a good way you can get blocked. I personally believe that, you talk to people the way you want to be talked to. I don't know how you want to be talked to. I don't know if you like being cussed out, talked to like you're, I don't know how you like being talked to. But I require respect. You don't have to come on social media and show your behind and be a jerk. You don't have to do that. And when people initially approach you disrespectful like that, I just come to the conclusion that something's wrong with you. And, take that out on someone else. I said that to go into my point. But basically, she came in saying, her and another individual came in and said, Black folks aren't, well, she said something completely different. I don't know what she was saying, something about Native Indians. And honestly, to be real with you, the ones you guys call Native Indians, the true Native Indians, and you can get mad if you want to. You already know that I'm going to say what I feel or what I know or what I believe. The true Native Indians look like me. There was a time that they couldn't even tell the true Native Indians apart from those that they put in chains. Two, another person came in saying that, Black folks weren't slaves, they are prisoners of war. And I agree with that. Just because I don't say it in a video doesn't mean, I don't know our true origins. I mentioned something similar to that in the video called Virginia Was the Worst. There are a lot of things that I will discuss on this channel. The information I bring to you are things that I research, and I'm just verbatimly saying what I researched and then paraphrasing it and then putting it in my own words. I'm just bringing to you what's written down. So, if you're hearing slaves and Black African Americans, I really don't like the term African American. If I'm saying that, it's because it was written. It was written down. So I'm not about to be changing people's words unless I'm, trying to Like I summarize it in my own words, but I'm basically bringing to you what I research and what I read. And also what I wanted to say is you got to wonder why those called Black Americans, there I go again. You notice I say those called Black Americans. I say that for a reason. Because first of all, we're not black. Black is not even a group of people. You got to wonder why those called Black Americans' true origins is locked away tighter than Fort Knox. Next, ask yourself why our true identity has been creatively, intentionally hidden for centuries. They say we all came from Africa, particularly from coastal countries. But you know they make sure to steer you away from northern Africa, where true Israel is located. How many didn't know that true Israel was located or is located in northern Africa? I've been knowing that since I went to junior college. The Israel of modern times that they speak of so pridefully, sounding of much entitlement, was established in 1948. Why do you reestablish a nation, country that existed before Jesus Christ walked the earth? Lastly, who would you believe? A people who try to erase your existence but freely tell you where you supposedly came from? That doesn't even add up. I'm going to try to erase everything about you, but then I'm going to say, hey, you know you came from here. It don't even make sense. Okay, let's go. Florida Slaves Narrative, Part 2. Matilda Brooks, 79, who lives in Monticello, Florida, was once a slave of a South Carolina governor. Ms. Brooks was born in 1857 or 1858 in Edgefield, South Carolina. Her parents were Hawkins and Harriet Knox, and at the time of the birth of their daughter were slaves on a large plantation belonging to Governor Frank Pickens. On this plantation were raised cotton, corn, potatoes, tobacco, peas, wheat, and truck products. As soon as Matilda was large enough to go into the fields, she helped her parents with farming. The former slave describes Governor Pickens as being very good to his slaves. He supervised them personally, although official duties often made this difficult. He saw to it that their quarters were comfortable and that they always had sufficient food. When they became ill, he would himself doctor on them with pills, castor oil, turpentine, and other remedies. Their diet consisted largely of potatoes, cornbread, syrup, greens, peas, and occasionally ham, fowl, and other meats or poultry. Their chief beverage was coffee made from parched corn. I wonder how that coffee tastes. Since there were no stoves during slavery, they cooked their foods in large iron pots suspended from racks built into the fireplaces. Fried foods were prepared in iron spiders, large frying pans with legs. These pans were placed over hot coals, and the seasoning was done with salt, which was secured from evaporated seawater. After the food was fried, and while the coals were still glowing, the fat of oxen and sheep was melted to make candles. Any grease left over was put into a large box to be used later for soap making. Lye for the soap was obtained by putting oak ashes in a barrel and pouring water over them. After standing for several days until the ashes had decayed, holes were drilled into the bottom of the barrel and the liquid drained off. The liquid was the lye, and it was then trickled into the pot into which the fat had been placed. The two were then boiled, and then after cooling, it would be cut into squares for soap. My goodness, they were some highly intelligent. You got to realize that the people that they put in chains, they were like the elites. They were the people that they knew what to do. That's why it's baffling when you hear so many people, particularly white Americans and European whites, call basically say our people or we are like imbeciles, inferior mentally. It's crazy. I wonder if they're like talking about themselves. Water for cooking and other purposes were obtained from a well, which also served as a refrigerator at times. That's deep. Matilda does not recall seeing ice until many years later. In the evenings, Matilda's mother would weave cloth on her spinning jenny improvised loom. This cloth was sometimes dyed in various colors: blue from the indigo plant, yellow from the crocus, and brown from the bark of the red oak. Other colors were obtained from berries and other plants. How many people can do that today? If it came down to it, how many? And I'm not even talking about the ethnicity, race. How many people can do these things I just named? Create colors and dye their own clothes. In seasons other than picking time for the cotton, the children were usually allowed to play in the evenings when cotton crops were large. However, they spent their evenings picking out seeds from the cotton bolls in order that their parents might work uninterruptedly in the fields during the day. The cotton, after being picked and separated, would be weighed in balances and packed tightly in crocus bags. Chicken and goose feathers were jealously saved during these days. They were used for the mattresses that rested on the beds of wooden slats that were built in corners against the walls. Hoop skirts were worn at the time, but for how long afterward, Matilda does not remember. She only recalls that they were disappearing about the time I saw a windmill for the first time. The coming of the Yankee soldiers created much excitement among the slaves on the Pickens plantation. The slaves were in ignorance of activities going on and of their approach. When the first one was sighted, the news spread just like dry grass burning up a hill. Despite the kindness of Governor Pickens, the slaves were happy to claim their newfound freedom. Some of them even ran away to join the northern armies before they were officially free. Some attempted to show their loyalty to their old owners by joining the southern armies. But in this section, they were not permitted to do so. After she was released from slavery, Matilda came with her parents to the Monticello section, where the Knoxes became paid house servants. The parents took an active part in politics in the section, and Matilda was sent to school. White teachers operated the schools at first and were later replaced by Negro teachers. Churches were opened with Negro ministers in the pulpits, and other necessities of community life eventually came to the vicinity. Jackson Reverend Squires, lying comfortably in a bed encased with white sheets. Reverend Squires Jackson, former slave and minister of the gospel, living related the story of his life. Born in a weather-beaten shanty in Madison, Florida, September the 14th, 1841, of a large family, he moved to Jacksonville at the age of 3 with the master and his mother. Very devoted to his mother, he would follow her into the cotton field as she picked or hoed cotton, urged by the thrashing of the overseer's lash. His master, a prominent political figure of that time, was very kind to his slaves, but would not permit them to read and write. Relating an incident after having learned to read and write, one day as he was reading a newspaper, the master walked upon him unexpectedly and demanded to know what he was doing with a newspaper. He immediately turned the paper upside down and declared, "Confederates done won the war." The master laughed and walked away without punishing him. It's interesting to know the slaves on this plantation were not allowed to sing when they were at work, but with all the vigilance of the overseers, nothing could stop these silent songs of labor and prayers for freedom. Again, why? You gotta wonder why these folks didn't want black folks to read. On Sundays, the boys on the plantation would play home ball and shoot marbles until church time. After church, a hearty meal consisting of rice and salt picked pork was usually Sunday fare, cooked in large iron pots hung over indoor hearths. Sometimes coffee made out of parched cornmeal was added as an extra treat. Is anyone gonna ever try to make some coffee out of cornmeal and the other things that they use to make coffee? If you do, could you let me know how it tastes? And I'm not a coffee drinker, period. But I would like to know how that tastes. I might try to do it myself. He remembers the start of the Civil War with the land on the Atlantic cable by the Great Eastern, being 19 years of age at the time. Hearing threats of the war which was about to begin, he ran away with his brother to Lake City, many times hiding in trees and groves from the posse that was looking for him. At night, he would cover up his face and body with Spanish moss to sleep. One night, he hid in a tree near a creek, overslept himself. In the morning, a group of white women fishing near the creek saw him and ran to tell the men. Fortunately, however, he escaped. After 4 days of wearied traveling, being guided by the North Star and the Indian instinct inherited from his Indian grandmother, he finally reached Lake City. Later reporting to General Scott, he was informed that he was to act as orderly until further ordered. On Saturday morning, February 20th, 1861, General Scott called him to his tent and said, "Squire, I've just had you appraised for 1,000, and you are to report to Colonel Geist in Alachua County for service immediately." That very night, he ran away to Wellborn, where the Federals were camping. There, in a horse stable, were wounded colored soldiers stretched out on the filthy ground. The sight of these wounded men and the feeble medical attention given them by the Federals was so repulsive to him that he decided that he didn't want to join the Federal Army. You see that? They were giving their lives to help them fight this war. And he basically was saying that they were being ignored. Cold. You got to be a cold son of a bitch to treat somebody like that that's helping you. Didn't I say even dogs don't have the sense to be loyal? In the silent hours of the evening, he stole away to Tallahassee, thoroughly convinced that war wasn't a place for him. While in the horse shed makeshift hospital, a white soldier asked one of the wounded colored soldiers to what regiment he belonged. The Negro replied, 54th Regiment, Massachusetts. At that time, the only railroad was between Lake City and Tallahassee, which he had worked on for a while. At the close of the war, he returned to Jacksonville to begin work as a bricklayer. During this period, Negro skilled help was very much in demand. The first time he saw ice was in 1857, when a ship brought some into his port. Mr. Moody, a white man, opened an ice house at the foot of Julia Street. This was the only ice house in the city at that time. On Sundays, he would attend church. One day, he thought he heard the call of God beseeching him to preach. He began to preach in 1868 and was ordained an elder in 1874. Some of the interesting facts obtained from this slave of the fourth generation were: at the time, he was a fourth generation slave. And then I think about people when they're talking about their time in America, or when they came to America, they be like, yeah, I'm the second generation. People say, yeah, I'm the fourth generation this. No, I'm the first generation, or I'm the second generation. I think about how many generations we have in this country. I don't even know where to start counting. We have long, strong roots in this country, and it's past time that people who look like me you walk around like, hey, I'm like 20 generations in this country. You better respect me, for real. Some of the interesting facts obtained from this slave of the fourth generation were: salt was obtained by evaporating seawater. 2, There were no regular stoves. 3, cooking was done by hanging iron pots on rails in the fireplaces. 4, an open well was used to obtain water. 5, flour was sold at $12 a barrel. How much is flour a pound? How many pounds they sell flour? 2-pound bag? About $12 now, huh? A bag of flour. Shin plaster was used for money. The first buggy was called Rockaways due to the elasticity of the leather springs. Reverend Jackson saw his first buggy as described in 1851. During the Civil War, cloth as well as all other commodities were very high. Slaves were required to weave the cloth. The women would delight in dancing as they marched to and fro and weaving the cloth by hand. Even cotton seeds was picked by hand, holding the seeds out with the fingers. There was no way of ginning it by machine at that time. Reverend Jackson vividly recalls the croaker sacks being used around bales of the finer cotton known as short cotton. During this time period, he made all of the shoes he wore by hand from cowhides. The women slaves at the time wore grass skirts woven very closely with hoops around on the inside to keep from contacting the body. These people have skills up the... Nowadays, it's baffling to me when I hear a woman say she don't know how to change her tire. So what you gonna do? If you're in the middle of nowhere and it's gonna take AAA to get to you, about 2 hours to get to you, you gonna just sit there? You better get some skills. Gleefully, he told of the Saturday night baths in big wooden wash tubs with cut out holes for the fingers during his boyhood, of the castor oil, old-fashioned paregoric, calomel, and Burmo chops used for medicine at that time. The herb doctors went from home to home during times of illness. Until many years after the Civil War, there were no practicing Negro physicians. Soap was made by mixing bones and lard together. I would have loved for them to specify what kind of bones they were talking about. Heating and then straining into a bucket containing alum, turpentine, and rosin. Lye soap was made by placing burnt ashes into straw with corn chucks placed into hopper. Water is poured over this mixture and a trough is used to seize the liquid that drips into the tub and let stand for a day. Very little moss was used for mattresses. Chicken feathers and goose feathers were the principal constitutes during his boyhood. Soot mixed with water was the best medicine one could use for the stomach ache at that time. Reverend Jackson married in 1882 and has 7 sons and 7 daughters. Owns his own home and plenty of other property around the neighborhood. 96 years of age and still feels as spry as a man of 50, keen of wit, with a memory as good can be expected. This handsome bronze piece of humanity with snow white beard over his beaming face ended the interview saying, "I am waiting now to hear the call of God to the promised land." He once was considered as a candidate for senator after the Civil War, but declined to run. He says that the treatment during the time of slavery was very tough at times, but gathering himself up, he said, "No storm lasts forever, and I had the faith and courage of Jesus to carry me on, continuing. Even the best masters in slavery couldn't be as good as the worst person in freedom. Oh God, it is good to be free, and I am thankful." Did you guys listen to what he accomplished after slavery? After he was set free from slavery, this man has several properties and sharp, cognitive. His memory is intact. And I'm going to emphasize again, this is the state of him after slavery. Now, what excuse do our people have today, 2023? You see what I'm saying? You got to have a desire to want to do better and not be concerned about what these idiots say about you. The man was recently freed from slavery and had a successful life, owned property, and whatnot. And then you look at some of our people today and you like, what in the hell is wrong with you? Yeah, I know I talk a lot about oppressors and what they've done, but, you know, I'm going to start talking about my folks. Because everything, come on, you can't blame everything on, you know, well, this is because of this, and I would have this if it wasn't because of that. It's like, you can't blame everybody for the circumstances in your life. Some of the things going on in your life, you know doggone well it's because of what you have done and what you're doing. I'm going to point out what needs to be pointed out, but sometimes our people going to have to look at ourselves. For real. For real, for real. Let's continue. John Henry Kemp, a long gray beard, a pair of piercing owl-like eyes, and large bare feet marked Prophet Kemp among the citizens of Daytona Beach, Florida. The prophet, christened John Henry as nearly as he can remember, is an 80-year-old ex-slave who reminisces of the past, delight all those who can prevail upon him to talk of his early life on the plantation of the section. Prophet Kemp does not talk only of the past, however, his conversation turns to the future. He believes himself to be equally competent to talk of the future and talks more of the latter if permitted. Oktibbeha County, that was a serious name right there. And I'm not trying to clown anybody that live out there, but I'm sure people who live out there, like, I live in Oktibbeha County, Mississippi. No, seriously. Oktibbeha County, Mississippi was the birthplace of the prophet. The first master he can remember was John Gay, owner of the plantation of some 2,700 acres and over 100 slaves, and a heavy drinker. The prophet calls Gay father and becomes very vague when asked if this title is a blood tie or a name of which he is generally known. According to Kemp, Gay was one of the meanest plantation owners in the entire section and frequently voices his pride in being able to employ the cruelest overseers that could be found in all Mississippi. Among these were such men as G.T. Turner, Nels T. Thompson, Billy Hole, Andrew Winston, and other men with statewide reputations for brutality. When all of the cruelties of one overseer had been felt by the slaves on the Gay plantation, and other meaner men's reputations was heard of on the Gay plantation, the master would delight in telling his slaves that if they did not behave, he would send for this man. Behaving, the prophet says, meant living on less food. Do you hear? Behaving, the prophet says, meant living on less food than one should have, mating only at his command, and for purposes purely of breeding more and stronger slaves on his plantation for sale. So you're going to tell me, I guess so, slaves weren't permitted to get married, and if they were married, and they happen to be sold together and was living on his plantation, the married couple couldn't have sex when they wanted to. Ooh, I know there was a lot of frustration on that plantation. So you was the only one that was able. This man was sick as hell. In some cases with women, subjecting to his every demand if they would escape hanging by the wrist for half a day or being beaten with a cowhide whip. So in some cases with women, so this man hung women by the wrist for half a day. How the hell? Can you imagine being hung by your wrist for half a day? About these whippings, the prophet tells many a blood-curdling tale. One day, when an old woman was plowing in the field, an overseer came by and reprimanded her for being so slow. One gave him some back talk. He took out a long, closely woven whip and leashed her severely. The woman became sore. She took her hoe and chopped him right across his head. And child, you should have seen how she chopped this man to a bloody death. That's why I don't understand. If this woman did this during a time where they were legally owned like animals, I don't understand when a woman allows a man to put his hands on her and she just sit there and take it. Okay, let me go back to what I was talking about. Prophet Kemp will tell you that he hates to tell these things to any investigator because he hates for people to know just how mean his father really was. So great was the fear in which Gay was held that when Kemp's mother, Arnett Young, complained to Miss Gay that her husband was constantly seeking her for a mistress and threatening her with death if she did not submit, even Miss Gay had to advise the slaves to do as Gay demanded, saying, "My husband is a dirty man and will find some reason to kill you if you don't. I can't do a thing with him." Since Arnett worked at the big house, there was no alternative, and it was believed that out of the union with her master, Henry was born. A young slave by the name of Broxton Kemp was given to the woman as husband at the time Jim Kemp was born. It is from this man that Prophet took his name. Why would you, aside from slavery, this is aside from slavery, why would a man want to be with a woman that don't want to be with him? Wouldn't you want to be with somebody that want to be with you? Is your mind that twisted that you don't even care that this woman don't want to be with you? What sick pleasure would you get out of being with someone who does not want to be with you? Can anybody answer that question? Let's continue. Life on the plantation held nothing but misery for the slaves of John Gay. A week's allowance of groceries for the average small family consisted of a package of about 10 pounds containing crudely ground meal, a slab of bacon called side meat, and from a pint to a quart of syrup made from sorghum, depending on the season. All slaves reported for work at 5 o'clock in the morning, except those who cared for the overseer, who began their work an hour earlier to enable the overseer to be present at the morning checkup. This checkup determined which slaves were late or who had committed some offense late on the day before or during the night. These were signed out, and before the rest of the slaves began their work, they were treated to the sight of these delinquents being stripped and beaten until blood flowed. Women were no exception to the rule. The possible loss of his slaves upon the Declaration of Freedom on January 1st, 1866, caused Gay considerable concern. His liquor-ridden mind was not long in finding a solution. However, he barred all visitors from his plantation and insisted that his overseers see to carrying out of this detail. They did with such efficiency that it was not until May 8th when the government finally learned of the condition and sent a marshal to the plantation that freedom came to Gay's slaves. May 8th is still celebrated in this section of Mississippi as the official Emancipation Day. Relief for the hundreds of slaves of Gay came at last with the Declaration of Freedom for them. The government officials divided the grown and growing crops, and some land was parceled out to the former slaves. Kemp may have gained the name prophet from his constant reference to the future and to his religion. He says he believes on one faith, one Lord, and one religion, and preaches this belief constantly. He claims to have turned his back on all religions that do not do as the Lord says. And keeping this belief, he says he presents the true primitive Baptist church, but does not have any connection with that church because he believes it has not lived exactly up to what the Lord expects of him. Emma Knight. You folks gonna have to bear with me because they wrote it exactly how she spoke. Emma Knight, living at 924 North Street, Hannibal, Missouri, was born in slavery on the farm of Will and Emily Eli, near Florida, Monroe County. The following is her story as she told it. We lived on a creek near Florida. We belonged to Will Eli, who had only 5 slaves, my father and mother and 3 of us girls. I was only 8 or 9 years old. The Eli's and had 8 children. Durr was Paula, Ann, Sarah, Becky, Emily, Lizzie, Will, Ike, and Frank. Lizzie was the oldest girl, and I was to belong to her when she was married. They gave slaves to their children when they got married. The master of the house was better to us than the mistress. We didn't have to work none too hard because we was so young, I guess. We cut weeds along the fences, pulled weeds in the garden, and helped the mistress with the hoeing. We had to feed the stock, sheep, hogs, and cows because the young masters wouldn't do the work. In the evenings, we was made to knit a finger width, and if we missed the stitch, we would have to pull all the yarn out and do it over. The master's girls learned us to read and write. We didn't have hardly no clothes, and most of the time, they was just rags. We went barefoot until it got real cold. Our feet would crack open from the cold and bleed. We would sit down and bawl and cry because it hurt so. Mother made moccasins for our feet from old pants. Late in the fall, master would go to Hannibal and bring us shoes and clothes. We got them things only once a year. I had to wear the young master's overalls for underwear and Lindsay's for a dress. My father was took away. My mother said he was put on a block and sold because the master wanted money to buy something for the house. Ma told me she come from Virginia or down south someplace. They brought her in a box car with lots of other colored people. There was several cars full with men in one car, women in another, and the younger ones in another, and the babies in another, with some of the women to care for them. They bought them to Palmyra and sold them. Master Clyde bought my mother. I don't know where my father came from. Mistress also told us that if we run away, somebody would catch us and kill us. We was always scared when somebody strange come. The first we knew there was a war was when some soldiers come through. We was scared. We was sure scared then. Once a man come and we thought he was a patroller, but he asked for something to eat. Mother took him to the mistress. She gave him something to eat wrapped in a paper and told him to get off the place. Some Union soldiers came and told us that we was free like they was, and he told us not to be afraid. They wouldn't hurt us. They told us the war was over. The master told mother not to go away, that if she stayed for a while, he would give her a couple $100. We stayed a while, but she never got no money. Hired out Miss James across the street from my clothes and schooling. Miss James had 2 girls. One of them learned me not to be such a tomboy and not to be so rough. I tell you, I was a bad girl when I was young. I would climb every tree on the master's farm, and my clothes was always in rags from being so rough. My mother used to whip me most every day with a broomstick and even hit me with chairs. I guess I was bad. If I had $1 for every broom handle that was laid across my back, I would have lots of money. I tell yo, we was raised plenty tough them days. The young folks can't stand such raising these days. They just couldn't go through what we was through. The young folks now just couldn't do it all. We was never loud on the street after 9 o'clock. We sure run for home when the church bell done rung on the hill at 9 o'clock. Nowadays, the young folks stay out half the night and they steal and even kill each other over trifling things. I know it because I see them do these things. I suppose their parents are a lot to blame. I was married when I was young, less than 20, I reckon. I have one girl, but she is dead now. Her boy lives with me. I gets a pension, $7 a month, for about a year now. This little old shack belongs to me. Up from Slavery might well be called this short biographical sketch of Henry Maxwell, who first saw the light of day on October 17, 1859, in Lowndes County, Georgia. His mother Ann was born in Virginia, and his father Robert was born in South Carolina. Captain Peters, Ann's owner, brought Robert Maxwell from Charles Howe as a husband for Ann. To this union were born 7 children, 2 girls, Elizabeth, Rosetta, and 5 boys, Richard, Henry, Sims, Solomon, and Sonny. Has anyone noticed that? I think anytime I read something about slavery in these past videos I've done, I noticed that it seemed like these women they often have 7 children. If it's not 5, it's 7. If it's not 7, it's 5. I'm like, what? Is that intentional? Check that out. Just a tot when the Civil War gave him and his people freedom, Maxwell's memories of bondage days were vivid through the experiences related by older Negroes. He relates the story of the plantation owner who trained his dogs to hunt escaped slaves. He had a Negro youth hide in a tree some distance away, and then he turned the pack loose to follow him. One day he released the bloodhounds too soon, and they soon overtook the boy and tore him to pieces. You notice I've read quite a few stories about slaves or overseers having ferocious dogs. When the youth's mother heard of the atrocity, she burst into tears, which were only silenced by the threats of her owner to set the dogs on her. Maxwell also relates tales of the terrible beatings that the slaves received for being caught with a book or for trying to run away. After the Civil War, the Maxwell family was united for a short while, and later they drifted apart to go their various ways. Henry and his parents resided for a while longer in Lowndes County, and in 1880 they came to Titusville with the 2 younger children, Solomon and Sonny. Here Henry secured work with a farmer for whom he worked for $12 a month. In 1894, he purchased a small orange grove and began to cultivate oranges. Today, he owns over 30 acres of orange groves and controls nearly 200 more acres. He is said to be worth around $250,000 and is Titusville's most influential and respected colored citizen. He is married but has no children. He is said to be worth. Here's the thing, as I said in the other story, Henry Maxwell, the man was a free slave, freely released from bondage and became successful. And I pointed out, what's the issue with a lot of our people today who are, hundreds of years removed from slavery. But when we are reading what our people went through, we have no idea. We have no idea the vastness of cruelty that was inflicted upon them. I don't even think, as I said several times, I think the cruelty is so severe and so disturbing that a lot of it, even if it was documented, it's hidden somewhere. Because they said a lot of these enslavers actually kept diaries. That's narcissistic, right? So I think some of it is so cruel and so barbaric that a lot of them want to keep it hidden. But as I said, whatever's done in the dark will always come to the light. They had so much against them that people were legally able to be racist. I mean, the things they did and said and broad daylight to people who look like us was atrocious. But our people still managed to separate themselves and build their own successful communities until a racist, jealous person came and destroyed it. So they had the ability and desire and will to do that then. Imagine what can be done now. Okay, I'll be back with part 3 as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you for your time and support. Take care.